The Japanese desperately needed supplies for their troops on Leyte, and they sent convoy after convoy. The US were prepared, waiting like lions in wait, ready to devour the next round of ships. The Japanese sent their convoys anyway. The desperation for supplies was just too great. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for our younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Today we get into the Battle of Ormoc Bay, which was a series of air-sea battles between Imperial Japan and the United States in the Camotes Sea in the Philippines from November 9th to December 21st, 1944 at Ormoc, part of the Battle of Leyte in the Pacific Campaign of World War II. The battles resulted from Japanese operations to reinforce and resupply their forces on Leyte, and U.S. attempts to interdict them. This is where we will find the Sunday's ship, the destroyer Wakatsuki. After gaining naval control over the Western Pacific in mid-1944, the Allies attacked the Philippines in October, landing troops at Leyte Gulf on the east side of Leyte on October 20th, 1944. The island of Leyte was defended by about 20,000 Japanese. American General Douglas MacArthur, yes, the General MacArthur, thought that the occupation of Leyte would only be a prelude to the major engagement on Luzon. For the Japanese, maintaining control of the Philippines was crucial because losing the Philippines meant they would lose their oil supply lines from Borneo and Sumatra. Their fuel and supplies were already starting to run low, and without this critical fuel, much of their navy would stand still. The IJN responded to this attack with a combined fleet attack that led to the massive Battle of Leyte Gulf from October 23rd to the 26th. In this enormous engagement, the Japanese Navy was obliterated as a strategic force. However, this was not at first clear, and the Japanese commander in the Philippines, General Tomoyuki Yamashita, believed the U.S. Navy had suffered several casualties and that the Allied land forces might be vulnerable. Accordingly, he began to reinforce and resupply the garrisons on Leyte. Over the course of the battle, the Japanese ran 9 convoys to the island, landing around 34,000 troops from the 1st, 8th, 26th, 30th, and 102nd Divisions. The Japanese always put up a vicious fight, and they'd never go down without swinging first. Ormoc City, at the head of Ormoc Bay on the west side of Leyte, was the primary port on the island and the main destination of the convoys, meaning it was imperative they hold this point. Decryption of messages sent using the Purple Cipher alerted the Allies to the concentration of Japanese shipping around Leyte. However, they initially interpreted this as an evacuation. But by the first week of November, the picture was clear, and the Allies began to interdict the convoys. Alright, we have our setup, and now let's get into operations, starting with the Japanese. On November 8th and 9th, the Japanese dispatched 2 convoys from Manila to Ormoc Bay, TA-3 and TA-4. They were spaced 1 day apart so that the destroyers escorting the first convoy could double back and escort the second. However, unfortunately for the Japanese, these convoys were spotted on November 9th and attacked by land-based aircraft of the 5th Air Force. On November 10th, the 38th Bomb Group, based on Morotai, sent 32 B-25 Mitchells escorted by 37 P-47 Thunderbolts to attack another convoy, TA-4, near Ponson Island. Reaching the convoy just before noon, the B-25s attacked at minimum altitude in pairs, sinking the 2 largest transports, Takatsu Maru and Kashi Maru, disabling a third, and sinking 2 of the patrol craft escorts at a cost of just 7 bombers, for which the group was awarded the Distinguished Unit Citation. But the Japanese transports had been able to put ashore the 10,000 soldiers they'd been transporting, be it with only a fraction of the needed supplies. On November 11th, U.S. 3rd Fleet Commander Admiral William F. Halsey ordered an attack by 350 planes of Task Force 38 on the combined convoys. 4 destroyers, Shimakaze, Wakatsuki, Hamanami, and Naganami, and 4 transports, Mikasa Maru, Taisan Maru, Seisho Maru, and Tensho Maru were sunk, with many of the 4,000 soldiers on board killed. Rear Admiral Mikio Hawakawa went down with Shimakaze, and some 1,000 sailors from the 8 ships were killed. This was a massive loss for the Japanese, but it was only the beginning. Convoy TA-5 left Manila on November 23rd for Port Kadungan and Port Balangan. Of the 6 transports in this convoy, 5 were sunk by air attack. T-111, T-141, T-160, T-6, and T-10. Again, this was devastating for the Japanese. When we look at the American destroyer sweeps, bad weather in late November made air interdiction less effective, and so the US began to send in their destroyers into Ormoc Bay. Kaningao Channel was swept from mines by the minesweepers Pursuit and Revenge, and the 4 destroyers of Destroyer Squadron 22, or Desron 22, which were Waller, Pringle, Renshaw, and Softly, under the command of Captain Robert Smith, entered the bay on November 27th, where they shelled the docks at Ormoc City. An Allied patrol plane radioed a message to the division noting that a surfaced Japanese submarine, I-46, was south of Pasehan Island and heading for Ormoc Bay. The division headed south to intercept, and at 1:27 a.m. on November 28, 1944, Waller's radar picked up the target just off the northeast coast of Ponson Island. Waller disabled I-46 with her first shots, and, unable to submerge, she could only return fire with her deck guns until she sank at 1:45 a.m. If you're keeping score, Japan has lost 18 vessels thus far. This puts the score at US 18, Japan 0. Next, it's Convoy TA-6. 2 transports, Shincho Maru and Shinetsu Maru, escorted by 3 patrol vessels, subchasers numbers 456 and 53 and patrol boat number 105, left Manila on November 27th. They were attacked by American PT boats in Ormoc Bay on the night of November 28th and by air attack as the survivors left the area. All 5 ships were sunk, but not before they were able to unload most of their badly needed cargo to the troops on Leyte. That brings us up to US 23, Japan 0 in terms of vessels sunk. After another US destroyer sweep on the night of November 29th to the 30th in search of a reported convoy resulted only in the destruction of a few barges. The next convoy, TA-7, a convoy of 3 transports, departed Manila on December 1st, escorted by destroyers Take and Kua under the command of Lieutenant Commander Masamichi Yamashita. 2 groups of transport submarines also took part in the operation. This convoy was docked at Ormoc City when it was engaged at 12:09 a.m. on December 3rd by 3 ships of U.S. Destroyer Division 120, or Des Div 120, which are Alan M. Sumner, Cooper, and Moale, under the command of Commander John C. Zahm. The U.S. ships sank the transports as they were unloading, but came under heavy attack from Yokosuka P-1Y Francis bombers, shore batteries, submarines that were known to be in the harbor, and the Japanese destroyers. Kua was sunk, and Commander Yamashita was subsequently killed. Take attacked Cooper with torpedoes and escaped, though with some damage. Cooper sank at 12:15 a.m., just 6 minutes after the engagement began, losing 191, and 168 were rescued from the water on December 4th by consolidated PBY Catalina flying boats. At 12:33 a.m., the 2 surviving U.S. destroyers were ordered to leave the bay, and the victorious Japanese successfully resupplied Ormoc Bay once more. This phase of the Battle of Ormoc Bay has gone down in history as the only naval engagement during the war in which the enemy brought to bear every type of weapon: naval gunnery, naval torpedoes, air attack, submarine attack, shore gunnery, and mines. This, so far, was turning out to be quite the disaster for the Japanese. And the devastation would only continue. If you are enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and their wrecks, check out our main show, Shipwreck Sunday, every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Alright, let's continue with the Battle of Ormoc Bay. On December 7th, the 77th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Andrew D. Bruce, made an amphibious landing at Albuera, 3.5 miles south of Ormoc City. The 77th Division's 305th, 306th, and 307th Infantry Regiments came ashore unopposed, but naval shipping was subjected to kamikaze attacks, resulting in the loss of destroyers Ward and Mann. If you don't know what a kamikaze is, it is a suicide attack via airplane that the Imperial Japanese moved to toward the end of World War II, since it caused massive damage to ships and to American sailors' psyches, and because the majority of their veteran pilots had already died earlier in the war, so they were left with rookies fresh out of flight school. It was effective to a degree, but was costly with airplanes and pilots. Our next Japanese convoy is TA-8, and this convoy carried 4,000 troops destined for Ormoc Bay, but which were unloaded at San Isidro, 30 miles north of Ormoc, after receiving news of the U.S. landings near Ormoc. All 5 transports, Akage-san Maru, Hakuba Maru, Shinsei Maru No. 5, Nichiro Maru, and T7 were all sunk on December 7th by air attack, and the escorting destroyers Ume and Sugi were damaged. Some 350 sailors were lost. Convoy TA-9 successfully landed some 4,000 troops at Palampam, but escorting destroyers entered the bay on December 11th where 2 were sunk, Yuzuki by air attacks and Uzuki by PT boats, and a third, Kiri, was damaged. By fighting this series of engagements in Ormoc Bay, the US Navy was eventually able to prevent the Japanese from further resupplying and reinforcing their troops on Leyte, contributing significantly to the victory in land battle. The final tally of ships breaks down into 6 total ships for the US, 3 destroyers, 1 high-speed transport, and 2 LSMs, and 31 Japanese ships, 6 destroyers, 20 small transports, 1 submarine, 1 patrol boat, and 3 escort vessels. This battle is often overlooked, with historians like Erwin J. Koppes arguing that naval historians have unjustly neglected the importance of these engagements, writing the following, quote, "In the end, it was the rather amorphous Battle of Ormoc Bay that finally brought Leyte and the entire Gulf area under firm Allied control. From 11 November 1944 until 21 December, the combined efforts of 3rd Fleet carrier planes, Marine fighter bomber groups, a pincer movement by the Army's 77th Division and the 1st Division, plus a motley assortment of destroyers, amphibious ships and PT boats trounced the now semi-isolated Japanese in a series of skirmishes and night raids. And because of poor weather conditions, air support for most of these surface actions was almost non-existent." Fires on the Plain is a renowned book by Japanese writer Shohei Uka, which illustrates the final conditions of the Japanese army on the island of Leyte and the desperate flight of some of its isolated soldiers after their units had been defeated by US armed forces, as they try to reach Palampon on Leyte's west coast in the hope of re-embarking Japanese vessels. It's linked in my Amazon storefront if you want to pick up a copy and support the channel at the same time. That link can be found in the description of this episode. This devastating loss for Japan only echoed what we already knew for the rest of the war. Japan was going to lose, and lose hard. The loss of numerous Japanese ships was only the beginning, as the US was working hard on 2 atom bombs that would devastate mainland Japan and bring World War II to a violent, bloody ending. The destroyer was side by side her fleet mates as they sank one after another, knowing it was her turn next. There was nowhere left to run, and aircraft swarmed above her like mosquitoes. She'd fought so hard for so long, but World War II was not going in favor of the Japanese, and neither was this battle. In this Sunday's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we get into the loss of the destroyer Wakatsuki.